What's up, everybody? Episode 17 of the Slip Wing Podcast coming right at you. Some big news this morning regarding probably the biggest fighter in the whole sport, Canelo Alvarez. He is suing his promoter, Golden Boy, and the network that distributes his fights, DAZN, for not staying true to their contract. When he signed with DAZN, or when Golden Boy signed the contract with DAZN, they were essentially guaranteeing him $365 million for 11 fights, which was probably going to account for the rest of his career. So, he was making roughly $35 million every fight. And, as they've tried to put another fight together for him, there's been various opponents that have been thrown out there. I know they've been throwing out Callum Smith and Billy Joe Sanders, and there's been some good opponents that have been in the mix. And for whatever reason, the pay or whatever is not matching that $35 million a fight that he's supposed to be getting. So he's suing them, and I'm not sure how I feel about it. I'm a little torn, because there's two ways of looking at it. There's the end of it from Canelo's perspective where, he's not the only one that signed the contract. So if he goes into a fight and he's risking his life, and they've created a contract together that says this is what my services are worth. Now he's the only one fulfilling that end of the contract, and he's the one really taking on the danger. The only danger for these companies would be financial danger, but not actual damage to their brain, potentially being part of that danger. So I understand that side of it. I also understand how probably everybody's taking a pay cut right now. Every fighter, every promoter, every network. I don't think that anybody is making what they were making pre-pandemic. So it's hard to imagine how or why one fighter would get excluded from that. Because in a way, the pandemic is affecting everybody. And it's almost like delusional, I think, for one individual fighter to say, like, I'm above this. I know that everyone else's money is fucked up, but not me. And there's also, I get that he is by far the biggest star in the whole sport. He's, in my opinion, the most talented and has probably the best resume, just as far as, who he's fought, when he fought them in their career and all that. There's no doubting what a great all-around tremendous boxer he is. He can do it all. The guy can do it all. But as a businessman, it seems like he's just going to price himself out of, the modern boxing market. If he's not careful, he's just going to stay inactive until globally we're at a place where we're safely doing, fights and sporting events with audiences. But he's essentially saying that he's willing to not be a part of the sport until that time. Because unless you have a live crowd, unless you have a live gate, there's really no way of developing that level of revenue for one fight. It's not possible, even with pay-per-view. I don't know the exact figures, but the amount that's coming from people actually showing up and being there, that's a big percentage of what of where the money's coming from. So I don't know how he thinks he's immune from this, or how he thinks they're supposed to just come up with some more money, and just and maybe cut certain cards and cut certain fights, and there's potential that fucks up somebody else's fight, and somebody else's fight they might not be talking about making $35 million. They might be talking about $35,000. So now you're fucking up somebody's $35,000. So I don't know, man. I think he's gonna have to, at some level, come to terms with the fact that he's not going to be able to make what he thinks he should make for a fight during coronavirus. Again, last time I'll play the flip side card, but he has every right to get out of this contract now because he's essentially in a contract that's impossible to fulfill, and it doesn't look like he's being offered like any sort of meaningful alternative. So I understand where he's coming from, man. It's a very complicated situation. You know, I respect what he's doing in a sense because of, you know, how Mikey got out of his contract with Top Rank and him being inactive and everything. But it's different times and it's not entirely the same. I just want to see the man fight. I think he's the best of his time. And, you know, I look forward to seeing him in the ring again. And I hope that this isn't something that gets dragged out for a long time. But I think it has the potential to. I think this has the potential to be a long time in his career because he's already not fought since November. My opinion, he's not going to fight the rest of the year, for sure. I think you're looking at Cinco de Mayo next year will be the next time you see Canelo fight. That's my opinion. Don't quote me on it, but that could be what's coming for him. As far as fights this weekend, there was one card on ESPN at the MGM Bubble on Saturday. There was another one at the Microsoft Theater in Los Angeles on Fox with PBC. The Saturday card, the main event was a fucking horrific, ugly fight between Jamel Herring and Jonathan Oquendo. It's very, very rare that I call a fight horrible or I speak that way about fighters or a fight. I'm not even talking specifically about each fighter, but them two in the ring together was fucking oil and vinegar. But I'll get to that in a second. Before that, there was an undercard packed with young talent, which is, again, one of my favorite parts about these pandemic fight cards, man. Like, we're really seeing these young guys and discovering these young guys at a place in their career where it's not normal that we would see them. You know, a lot of times with these young prospects, you don't see them until there's a certain amount of development that's happened. And here, we're getting to watch more of that development than we normally would. So I'm really enjoying that part. The first one was actually the brother of Josh Franco, who just won a title. His name is Jesse Rodriguez, 12-0, 8 knockouts, and stopped Jamel Rivera in the first round. Just walked right through him. And, you know, this is at flyweight. These guys are 110 pounds, I believe, or 108. It's one of the smallest divisions in all of boxing. But these guys didn't look like it. I think they were both about 5'6", 5'7", which is the same height as Manny Pacquiao and, you know, a lot of other guys at you know, featherweight to welterweight. So they didn't look like really tiny guys. And I can tell you, this guy, Jesse Rodriguez, does not punch like a flyweight. I mean, the footwork he has to get inside, he's aggressive, but he's not. He's only aggressive when you give him the chance to be. He's kind of cool with sitting back, but the minute you give him that little spot, he sort of slips on the inside. And his feet, you know, he'll get off a combination and then slip around, change the angle. And he's just a very slippery guy. And this guy, Rivera, it was like he got caught up in a tornado. He had no idea what to do with him. You know, there was a handful of times where he sort of tried to sit and trade with him. And there was no chance. This guy would get off too quick, turn him, get off two more, go around, get back on the outside, working the jab. Like, this was a very, very workman-like performance from a young dude. I think maybe he's 19, 20 years old. Like, the kid he's like a young Chocolatito, but it's even tighter. Like, his game is even tighter. He doesn't get hit as much. The defense is more in tune with his game a little bit. And yeah, he's wildly impressive, this guy, Jesse Rodriguez, man. I really enjoyed him. As far as flyweights, you know, I don't know too much about the flyweight division right now. I would have to do a little research into it. It's hard to imagine that there's too many guys at 108 pounds that punch like this guy, because when he lands, you can hear it. Whap! Like, he was hitting this guy with body shots that you could hear the thud on them. You could hear how good his balance is and how he really just, like, when he gets ready to plant, he just plants and throws. He's not doing touch shots. He's a solid puncher. So definitely, if you can, check out Jesse Rodriguez and check out his brother, Joshua Franco. Very, very talented titleist. You know, he said after the fight that his brother winning a title was a big motivator for him. So it's cool seeing these guys. You know, this is his 12th fight. And again, not everybody's like Lomachenko where 3-4 fights in, they're world champions. Most people are like this where they develop, and by the time they've had 20 fights or so, you know, they're making that leap. I think this guy's ready for the leap now. So I wouldn't be surprised if you see him in a title fight within the year. The second fight was a guy I've been talking about a bunch on this show, Jared Anderson. Tremendous young heavyweight, man. And the guy he fought was a guy named Rodney Hernandez, who I'd seen fight a couple of times. The level of competition that Hernandez has fought is way above Anderson. You know, Hernandez is one of those tough vet guys with like a good enough defense that he can usually go some rounds. Maybe every once in a while he catches like a young guy who is not fully developed. So he's got some wins against some unbeaten guys. This was not the guy. Anderson's 6-0, 6 knockouts. I've only ever seen him get knockouts. This is the first time I saw him go past the third round, because he's fought 3-4 times in the bubble. You know, he finally went past the third round with this guy. So patient, man. He was so patient. He stayed behind you could see he wanted to work on boxing, because when you see this guy, usually it's so easy for him to come forward and just like let a couple go like really quick and hard on the ropes and try to like hurt the guy. And this guy's clearly a little more solid than that, Hernandez. And it was a good opportunity for him to have somebody coming at him that knows how to move his head on the way in, so that it's not just a given that you're going to hit him, and it's not just a given that you're going to hurt him, and it's not just a given that he's not going to throw back. So it was the first time it felt like he was in a fight with two participants, even though he was completely dominant. It was a cool step up in class. It was a cool chance to see him. You know, what happens if he gets pushed just a little bit? What happens? Ultimately, what happens is he's got that other gear he can go to and get you out of there. Because in the fourth round, I don't even remember what he caught him with, but that fourth round, he catches Hernandez and just goes after him and just lands some really hard shots and puts him out. So I remember last week I was talking about Daniel Dubois. I think developmentally he's a little farther ahead, but I think that this guy Jared Anderson is in that same category of prospect, where I think that he's going to be knocking on the door within a couple of years. You know, within 2-3 years tops, he'll be ready for a title. He's a fully developed fighter. You know, it's tough because he's also a young guy. He's 20. But when somebody's that good, how much do you want to wait around? You know, for them to either get stale or for someone to beat them, or accumulating punishment over time. I think that if they space it out right, who knows? Maybe they want to develop them a little different and really take it slow with them because they're looking at the long game, which I get that too. And he's talented enough that maybe they should be thinking that way. But I would love to see him push himself more even than this guy could push him, moving up to that next kind of level of competition, that like Gerald Washington. I'm trying to think of some other like good kind of opponents like that. The dude that beat Konoski, what's his name? Hellenius. You know, someone in that level at heavyweight, I would like to see him in with. I don't think he's title ready, but something in that category. The next one was a guy that trains with Jamel Herring and Terrence Crawford. His name is Steve Nelson, super middleweight, 17-0, 14 knockouts. Beat a guy named DeAndre Ware, stopped him in the 6th round. This guy, he's more than what he looks like. He's definitely got a weird timing about him that's difficult to deal with. There's no doubt about it. He has a real herky-jerky style. You know, it doesn't look like a lot. It's weird because his speed's not great, his feet aren't great, his technique's not great. But he does have a weird way of finding a way to land shots. And it's an accumulation of pressure. The first 2-3 rounds, it looked like Ware could kind of do what he wanted to do. And by the fourth or fifth, it was like Nelson, I could see that he was landing shots that are even kind of hard to see that he's landing, because he's throwing them at such a weird time that it's not standard. He's throwing while you're throwing. He's throwing from a weird angle. Like, he's just got a really, really strange rhythm to him. This is the kind of guy he's going to be able to beat. They were saying during the broadcast that he was calling out guys like David Benavidez and all that. I got to be honest, man. I don't think this guy has any chance with the top guys at super middleweight. And I don't, I'm always down for a fucking underdog story. Don't get me wrong. And I think he seems like a great guy, and he's a good fighter. But his chin is like as far up in the air as he could possibly fucking have it. And he's always on the front foot. So he's always on the front foot. And yeah, his gloves are high, but he's got that stance where his gloves are high, but his chin's up. So he's essentially exclusively relying on his gloves and on his reflexes to pick shots off. There's nothing about his stance. If you're standing up here, this is always here. But if you make yourself smaller and your chin is tucked into your stance alone is making your chin a smaller target. He's not doing that. That's not a part of his technique. That's not how he learned. They said he started a little late, and maybe that's part of it, that he didn't learn that, that technique of trying to keep your chin attached to something and keeping it low and keeping everything small and tight. He's really right up here, and he's straight up in the air, and when he's throwing, it's in the same spot. So he's always available to get clipped with something. And I would imagine that somebody that's a little slicker than DeAndre Ware and maybe has a little more power could capitalize on that. But I think anybody that gets in with him is going to be surprised at what they get hit with. They're gonna get hit with shit in exchange. They're like, where the fuck did that come from? You know what I mean? But I just don't think that that's effective against the very best. Other than that, I think he's a problem, though. But if you're talking about him fighting Benavidez, or if him, having any kind of chance against someone like Caleb Plant, I'm not seeing it. I like him a lot. It'd be cool if he proved me wrong. I love an underdog, but I'm not seeing it. And I'll be honest, I'm not really seeing it with Jamel Herring right now, man. So let's just get into this main event, man. This was like one of the ugliest fucking fights you could possibly imagine. Right from rip, round one, Oquendo's coming in head first. Not really even throwing, just kind of trying to muscle Herring around, get him to the ropes, maybe stuff some body shots in on the inside. The first 5 rounds, there were spots where Herring could kind of get some space and get some work off and get some clean work off. But 90% of this fight was wrestling. 90% of this fight was Oquendo just sort of charging in recklessly. And this is a veteran fighter. This is a guy who's 37 years old. He's 31-7 with 19 knockouts. He's got a win over Johnny Gonzalez. If you know Johnny Gonzalez, the Mexican veteran. So to me, it was like, this is a legitimate opponent. And to round it all off, the ending of the fight was weird as shit, because he takes Oquendo takes another headbutt, or gives another headbutt, I should say. Another cut opens up over Herring's eye. The doctor, the cornerman, Tony Weeks, they're all standing there. They're asking him, can he see? Can he see? He's saying, I can't see. Right? So for 20 minutes after him saying that he can't see, right? So they decide, okay, this fight's over. You can't see. You're not allowed to fight. Now they're arguing about, is this going to go to the cards? Is this a TKO win for Oquendo? Is this a no contest? Is this a DQ win for Herring? Is it a TKO win for Herring? What is this? Because initially, Tony Weeks had ruled that the headbutt was intentional. The first headbutt was intentional. So the initial headbutt causes a cut. He takes another headbutt that causes another cut. But because the first one was ruled intentional, it became a DQ win for Herring, which doesn't entirely make sense to me. I feel like That's the perfect example of a fight that should have gone to the cards. Obviously, Herring would have won anyways. But there was so much about this fight that had a weird energy to it. And they were calling Herring out pretty hard on the telecast. Like, he was looking for a way out and all this and all that. I'm very hesitant to call fighters out for looking for a way out or for not having heart or for this or for that. You get up in that ring and you want to go to war like that, you got my respect. But it definitely, it didn't seem like the eye was swollen shut. It seemed like he couldn't see because there was blood in his eye because he had 2 cuts. Now, that's a perfectly good reason to not be able to see, but that's fixable. That's a lot more fixable than, a swollen shut eye or a broken orbital bone or, an actual injury to the eye, which would be a more justifiable reason to stop the fight normally. And there are guys that have fought through broken orbital bones. So, obviously, you can't look at every fight and every fighter the same way. But it didn't seem to me like that was a fight that he was dying to continue taking part in. And why would he? And to any normal person, it's like, well, this guy's not even really trying to punch me. He's just sort of charging in with his head, and he's busting my eyes up. Why am I going to take this? I can't, But the reason why is because he's a world champion, and he's supposed to be able to find a way to make it happen. And he's supposed to not be the guy that looks for that out. And I'm not saying he looked for that out, but it kind of looked like he did. It kind of looked like he said, all right, enough is enough on this fight. Like, I've been taking headbutts from this guy for 7 rounds. Enough is enough. And all he had to say was, I can't see. And I believe that he couldn't see. I just don't, I think that was a fixable problem. So it was a really weird performance. I know he's supposed to fight Carl Frampton next. I just don't see how that's a fight that he can win. And I like him a lot, man. I feel bad. I'm sure there's a lot of people talking shit about this fight right now. And I like him. I think he's a good fighter. He's got good boxing skills. He's very long for a 130-pounder. But he's got no chance against somebody like Carl Frampton. After this, he's clearly not adaptable. Once the fight is what it is, if he's not, if it's not going how he wants it to go, based on this fight, he does not have the ability to kind of switch gears and change it up and this was not a fight where he was taking a lot of punishment. He was taking a lot of headbutts, but he was not taking, sustained punishment from punches. It was a lot of wrestling. He was getting pushed around. He was getting shoved to the floor. It was a dirty fight, for sure. It was a dirty fight, but it wasn't a brutal fight. So what happens if it's a brutal fight? What happens if it's really one-sided? Do you have that inner Arturo Gatti to say, like, this is my moment, like, the minute I start feeling him breathing, I come back? Or, once it starts not going your way, is that just how the fight is? I think he has a lot to answer, which most world champions don't have to answer those things because they've already answered them. This brings up a whole bunch of more questions with him, man. And I'm not, Oquendo is a tough opponent, but he wasn't fighting in a winning manner. And it just didn't look like Herring had that extra gear to just keep the motherfucker on the outside behind the jab and just make it kind of a up on the toes night. Anytime Oquendo rushed in, he seemed perfectly willing to clinch, the same as Oquendo. So it would be hard to even blame Oquendo for all of the clinching, because I felt like once it got inside, Herring was fine to just sort of wrap up and wait for the ref to break them up. So I don't know what to think about this fight, but I don't think he has much of a chance against Frampton, to be honest with you. I think Frampton's just at a higher class. He's had to fight better fighters. He's had to adjust before. So we'll see if and when that fight happens. But this was a pretty disappointing, uninspired performance. And also, he had coronavirus. So who knows? And fighters got big pride. He's not going to come out and make excuses. He's not going to be like, oh, I had COVID, so that's why I fought bad. There's no way he would say that. Most fighters are not going to say shit like that. So I think that's a possibility that he just didn't have the wind or the youthful energy to make it happen like that. I wish him nothing but the best. I really like watching him fight. That fight with Ito was tremendous. But this was a rough one, man. He's got some questions to answer. The second fight was Sunday, September 6th at the Microsoft Theater. Prior to the main event being Yordenis Ugas against Abel Ramos, there was a fight between Jesus Alejandro Ramos and Esteban Garcia. Ramos is 19 years old, and he's absolutely gigantic for a welterweight. I think he's probably 6 foot, maybe 6'1". He looks like a middleweight, super middleweight, and he may fill into one before it's all said and done. Just walk through this guy, Esteban Garcia. And Garcia had some nice boxing skills, but the size difference was not manageable. It's what's crazy about some of these young welterweights that are able to cut crazy weight is they're so big. They look like middleweight, super middleweights. You know what I mean? They look like they're 160, 168. It's possible that they are. Some of these guys cut so much weight, come in next day 10, 15, 20 pounds over what they were weighing the day before. You know what I'm saying? Ramos is tremendous, man. It's hard to know from a 2-round fight where someone's at, but for 19 years old and against somebody with that kind of skill set, the way Garcia does, I think Jesus Ramos is going to be somebody that you're hearing about sooner than later. The next one was another young guy, Omar Juarez, a junior welterweight, fighting a guy named Dakota Linger, who, his technique was awful. He's got that he came to boxing from another combat sport. I don't remember which one it was. It was either MMA or wrestling. And they were talking about that on the telecast. But he's got a weird way of kind of letting his hands go in bursts, and he's not slow. His technique's not very good, but he can rip off 4 or 5 body shots pretty quick. Juarez is like a textbook fighter. If you were just teaching young guys how to fight, you'd want them to kind of have his technique. With him, I really like what he does. This fight went the distance. It went a full 8 rounds. Juarez pretty easily won a decision when it was all said and done. But there's something about Juarez where it's like he doesn't really know if he's coming or going sometimes. He has these periods where he just wants to fight on the inside. He just wants to brawl. He wants to plant right there. He wants to stand in front of you, and he wants to brawl. Then he's got these times where he's on the outside, and he's not really that active. So it's almost like he abandons boxing from the outside because he's like, oh, I'm not doing enough. But he's not active from the outside. He's pretty effective defensively, and he slips a counter in here and there. But his outside game is a little bit more passive. I'd like to see, if he can, I would love to see him sort of up that part of his game because he's got all the skills. He's a very well-rounded fighter. And obviously now this is the second or third time we've seen him since COVID. I think this is somebody you're going to see regularly now on PBC. He's super talented. He's super well-spoken, charismatic guy. So I think Juarez, we're going to see him frequently. He looks like a guy that wants to keep busy too. So let's just watch the development, man. I think he's 21. He's 9 fights in. He's learning every time. It looks like he gets a little more patient, a little smarter every time. And I'm looking forward to seeing what's next for this guy. He's a really talented kid. The main event was Yordenis Ugas and Abel Ramos. I'm sure if you look this fight up, it'll say it was a split decision. I don't know what the fuck that is. There's no way Ramos won the fight in a million years. It just didn't happen. Ugas is he's sort of like 6th man of the year kind of deal. He's like first off the bench as far as elite welterweights. You think about Errol Spence, Crawford, Thurman, Porter, Pacquiao, and Danny Garcia, Ugas is right after that. Like, this guy is right under the very elite, and the only reason he's not in the elite is because he hasn't beaten one of them. And so they read the first scorecard. Before I talk about the fight, I'll tell you about the fucking scorecards. I watched the fight later at night. It was like 1 a.m. And I think the first time I watched it, I had it like 10-2 for Ugas. And they read it, and the first guy's got it 9-3 for Ramos. And I remember I was just like, I can't deal with this at fucking 1 o'clock in the morning. I cannot deal with more bad decisions this fucking late at night. Like, I can't deal with it. They read the next two. It's 115, 113 for Ugas, and Ugas gets the fight. But in my mind, I'm like, those are awful close, huh? 7-5, 115, 113 for a fight like that. It didn't make sense to me. So I went back. I watched it Monday morning. Went to watch it again. And it was a little closer than I had remembered, particularly down the stretch. And, you know, those Fox announcers, they can get a little on the tip where once they've decided the narrative of the fight, they kind of stop watching the fight. And they just sort of go with what that narrative is. Like, if it's going one way, one guy's more well-known than the other, or the betting favorite, or whatever, you know, they're more, I feel like of all the networks, they're the most inclined to sort of go with that narrative style of commentating where you're not entirely watching the fight anymore. And I think they were doing some of that in the back end of the fight, because I watched it this time and I felt like, obviously I still feel like Ugas won clear. But the second time I watched it, I scored it 8-3. And I thought that Ramos won the last, I think, 3 rounds. Don't quote me on that, but it was the last couple. And he almost knocked him out at the end of the fight. There was 5 seconds left. He clipped him, got him buzzed. His legs were a little wobbly. So that time the 7-5 didn't seem all that crazy to me, because it was like, you know, if he's winning these last 3 rounds, he's being busier, you know, there's maybe 2 more in that first 9 that you could find, maybe. So luckily the right guy got the decision. But if I'm Ugas or I'm in his corner or whatever, I'm not happy with this performance. You know, he looked great. His skills looked great. But he got caught with some weird shit that he should not have been getting caught with. I think he looked a little complacent. Just a little complacent. Because this guy is not really on his level. And I think he got into a certain gear where it's like, if I can do just enough and not really get hit, you know, I can win these rounds. I would have loved to see him more active with his power punches. You know, he threw so many jabs. He's got the best double jab in the whole division. That's my opinion. Ugas has the best double jab in the whole division. Just bouncing it right off your head. The first one's lighter, the second one's harder, and then he follows it up. But it's pop, pop every time. He throws it the same fucking way. And it's the best in the division. But I kind of felt like there was just these long stretches where he would just sort of be picking off what Ramos was doing and not really coming back. I'm talking about the last 3-4 rounds. I would have liked to, and Ramos is a good fighter. That's a good opponent, you know. So respect to Ramos. But as far as Ugas, you know, fighting the elite welterweights, this would make me want to fight him a little more if I saw this fight. The Porter fight, maybe not so much, because I thought he beat Sean. But if I'm watching this fight, I'm like, yeah, I got this. If I'm Danny Garcia, if I'm Crawford, you know. But I hope this guy gets his shot. I hope this guy gets his shot sooner than later. He's 34 years old. I think his skills are as good as they're going to be. Maybe he'll get a little better. It does seem like he's continued to add tools even in his 30s. But yeah, I want this guy to get his shot now. I just don't think this performance is a good indicator that, you know, that he's explosive enough. I don't know if he's got the explosive power to beat elite welterweights. He's got the defense and the skills to compete every round for 12 rounds, though. No doubt about it. And maybe somebody a little flimsier or somebody who hasn't been active, you know, he can catch him slipping a little bit. But yeah, I think regardless, he's one of the best in the whole division, and I think he's a problem for anybody. This just was not his best night, and I think that the commentators sort of let him slide on the back end of that fight just by going with the narrative. So that was the fights this last weekend. There was some interesting anniversaries this week. One of them was that on September 10th, 1973, Muhammad Ali had a rematch with Ken Norton. And the first Norton fight, obviously Ali lost and got a broken jaw. It was only the second loss of his whole career. I think that based on listening to the commentary on the second fight, I think there was a little bit of a narrative working that Ali was a little washed up. He was a little past his day. And that in some ways this second Norton fight was kind of his way of reinvigorating his career and of getting the interest of the people back. There seemed to be some sort of notion that he was over the hill or kind of past his prime. And this fight was just tremendous, man. I did like a rough scorecard, and I actually wound up scoring it 6-6. But what was amazing about this fight was it's in 1973. There's a lot of fighters in 1973. But these two guys were almost in like a time machine. You watch the styles of fighters from that era, from 70s and before, they don't really look as much like the modern fighter. The style of fighting, the way they move, the slickness of the movement, just the whole game has just evolved so much. But these two guys right here were in a time machine. Like the footwork of Ali, that hasn't been really entirely matched, and the amount of time that he could do it, it's not like a lot of guys now where they plant and they have different, they box on the outside for a little bit. This guy would literally be like jogging almost for 12 rounds straight. And Norton, a lot of aggressive guys. There was a lot more aggressive fighters back then. Come forward, strong guys. But this Ken Norton, I've seen these guys fight a bunch before, but it was just cool appreciating it again. His upper body movement, his ability to slip back, slip to the side, slip forward. Like, he was making Ali miss so much from the outside for those first 4 rounds. Overall, it's like I felt like Ali kind of had the edge because that 12th round, he just brings it, man. He just brings it. He comes right out, and he sits down on his combinations more than he did for 11 rounds and just really takes it to Norton, which is what a great champion does. And ultimately, they would wind up fighting again, and Ali would beat him for a third time. It was also after this fight that Ali would knock out George Foreman. So this fight sort of signified the beginning of the second chapter for Muhammad Ali, that he was not washed up, that he was still very much the man, that he was the guy. And that's what great champions do. The minute you start doubting them a little bit, they prove you wrong. And that's Ali in a nutshell. I think that's that for this week, you guys. Thanks for tuning into episode 17 of the Slip and Wait podcast. And I'll catch you next week. Peace.